Working Capital Primer. This short video explains some of the key components of improving the cash conversion cycle in your organization. Working capital, in current measurement terms, what most organizations look at, would be translated to a simple formula called accounts receivable plus inventory minus accounts payable. That would be your net adjusted working capital, the new measure of working capital, which organizations use to drive value into and out of their organization.
Why is working capital management important?
Well, working capital management and working capital optimization is so important because it deals with your suppliers and your customers. It impacts those relationships, it impacts the business processes that support those. And it's also important because failure to pay attention to working capital management can quickly lead to a great increase in working capital, which will create a tremendous demand on cash and pulling from your lines of credit or however you borrow or access funds.
What metrics are used for managing working capital?
Well, there are lots of metrics used in an organization to drive improvements and to optimize working capital. But some of those metrics and some of the measurements that are used in identifying what working capital is used and if it's being improved have to do with days sales outstanding, days payable outstanding, as well as days of inventory or inventory turns, depending on what's being used. DSO is simply a calculation of how many days worth of sales is tied up in your accounts receivable. Inventory is how many days worth of inventory you have stored in your warehouses or in process. And your days payable outstanding is how quickly are you paying your suppliers. Are you sleeping?
Are industry benchmarks useful?
Well, industry benchmarks can definitely be useful. They can be used well, and they can also be abused quite frequently. They can be used well. They can provide some general guidance, pointing out areas where perhaps terms can be extended with your suppliers and with your partners, and they can also provide some general guidance against what's going on. They can certainly be abused as well, trying to compare your organization to another when there might be significant differences. For instance, you may be selling largely to government institutions which perhaps pay by credit card immediately. That's going to drive your DSO down and make you appear favorably to perhaps a competitor who doesn't sell to that sector.
What are the differences between traditional and alternative methods?
Okay. The traditional methods of measuring some of the working capital components, DSO, DPO, as well as some of the inventory measures, are calculated based off of, days sales outstanding is based off of what the AR is over the total sales, whereas the other two components, inventory and payables, are based off of the cost of goods sold or the cost of sales. This is helpful because those, for providing particular measurements and analysis within those areas. Those are the traditional measures. The alternative measures divide everything by the same denominator. It looks at inventory, accounts receivable, and payables over sales. Why that's helpful is you can look at a day of the alternative measures in any of these components is equivalent in dollar terms to a day of any other. So saving a day of DSO is equivalent to adding a day of payables in the alternative measures. It allows you to add them, and it's useful for the CFO and the treasurer to determine some of those numbers.
What are the key points to remember about working capital primer?
Okay, in the working capital primer, we just touched briefly on a few of these items that are important for managing working capital. One other key component is the treasurer in an organization should be the one that owns working capital. Many people influence the use of working capital, but the treasurer and the treasury group sits in a unique position to not only oversee but to own the management of working capital in conjunction with many other areas of the organization. This is important. This drives financial results. It drives how much funds you need to borrow, and it also impacts how efficiently you can run your organization. Working capital can and must be managed. Working capital management will impact both the balance sheet and liquidity. It will impact the income statement, and it will impact the processes of your organization. Working capital must be optimized. because you want to manage your suppliers and your customers well. That's critical for the business to run effectively.